pre-COVID, we were actually seeing 63% of student athletes report a mental health concern that impacts their capacity to perform. Yet we are only seeing 10% of those athletes get help.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Paula McQuaid and Jessica Renney to the podcast, the co-founders of Hone Athletics. Hone is dedicated to improving sport through mental well-being. Hone's digital platform is built on a decade of sport-specific mental health experience. It's their goal to empower coaches with the knowledge and tools needed to develop both sides of the athlete, the mental-emotional side as well as the physical side. Paula is a Gonzaga University graduate with a Master of Counselling and a member of the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association. When not working with clients as a psychotherapist and growing Hone, she also acts as a mental performance consultant for Hockey Canada's women's U18 national team and has earned a collection of medals with the team, including a new gold at the 2022 IIHF World Championships in Sweden. Jessica received her bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Lethbridge and then later her Master's of Arts in Counseling Psychology from the University of Victoria. Jess is also an active member of the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association. Jessica grew up surrounded by sport. Her father was a coach in the NHL for 13 years, and she was exposed to the importance of supporting wellness in high-performing cultures. She became dedicated to bringing to light the ways that leaders can better support development, both as individuals and performers. In this conversation, we dive into the stats on mental well-being in sport, stressors that our athletes experience, and more. As always, if you enjoyed the episode and want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast. And if you'd like word-for-word transcripts of the podcast, you can also access those by signing up to support the show. Just go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details for the free notes or transcripts. Now to part one of my conversation with Paula and Jessica. Enjoy the episode. Coaches, really excited to welcome Jessica and Paula from Hone to the podcast today. We're going to be diving into topics all around mental health in sport, and I'm confident that it's going to be a really valuable conversation, one for me personally as I'm coaching teams, but then for you guys that are listening. So Jessica and Paula, welcome, and I would love it if we could start off and talk about the stats, the real stats for mental health in sport. I think this is a good place to start, of just having a baseline understanding of what is actually going on when it comes to mental health in sport. And I'll throw it to either one of you that wants to share about those stats.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having us, Luke. So it's really important for all of us to obviously have a really good understanding of what we're seeing in athletics when it comes to mental health. And pre-COVID, we were actually seeing 63% of student athletes report a mental health concern that impacts their capacity to perform. Yet we are only seeing 10% of those athletes get help. So I was actually just looking at something this morning, and NCAA pushed out a report around student athlete well-being, and we're actually seeing an increase, quite a bit of an increase in those statistics. And they didn't highlight the exact numbers, so I don't want to misrepresent here. However, post-COVID to pre-COVID, we are seeing more athletes struggle with mental health concerns that impact their capacity to perform. But Luke, I think where Paula and I really find it interesting is, we're only seeing 10% get help. So that really, for us, why are we only seeing 10% get help? What's getting in the way of the systems that our athletes are existing in, and the culture that they're existing in, where we're not kind of connecting the dots, and they're not able to get the help that they need.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Thanks for sharing that, Jessica. I'd like to know just a little bit more about what you shared. You said 63% pre-COVID were reporting mental health issues that were impacting their ability to perform. correct? And
Correct.
then post-COVID, that's gone up. Can you talk a little bit more about what what that actually means? So those 63% of
Mhm.
athletes, wh- what does it mean that they're experiencing some mental health issue that impacts their ability to perform? And then maybe you could talk a little bit about uh, how we can get better at recognizing when that's happening in some of our athletes. Because if 63% are experiencing that, and I have 30 kids that I'm coaching, well, then that's a pretty significant number. Probably around 18 of them, right, are going through something that's impacting their ability to perform. So, could you share more about what that may be for those 63% of athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, again, really important for us to understand that the way we view mental health in the general public and the way that those statistics come alive in the general public, are not the same with athletes. So we have to take a very sport specific approach to athletes when it comes to mental health. So taking traditional models, or let's say helping models that we've used in the general public, and plopping them onto athletes doesn't work. Our athletes are experiencing very unique and specific stressors that exist within the athletic culture. So it's really important for us as leaders in sport and as coaches to have a better understanding of what those stressors are.
Yeah, and so that leads well into one of the things I wanted to talk about that we started talking about off air before we recorded, and just those unique stressors for athletes. So let's talk about them, and maybe you guys have a list of them, or just there's a few ones that commonly come up. What are these unique stressors that athletes experience that often the general public is not experiencing because they're not in this context?
Um, that's a great question, and I think just to be a little bit more clear is these are stressors that we all experience. They exist in our lives. The uniqueness comes in how they impact the athlete, and to the extent that they impact the athlete, and what gets in the way of them getting help. So we're looking at stressors such as time constraints. Consider athletes and the time constraints that exist in their world. Fatigue, pressure, we look at relationships. That's a huge one that kind of often we forget about. So, how are they managing relationships? Because it can be really challenging. Sometimes the only people you're connected to are those people on your team. But there's relationships outside of that that are so important. And when those start to slip, those are some very important people in our lives who we typically reach out to when we're feeling pressure, when we're feeling stress. And sometimes those are no longer as strong or as consistent as we need them to be. Um, Athletes can also become quite disconnected from people that are important to them. And again, when we're disconnected from people that matter to us, it can get really lonely. And when we need to reach out, those people, it can be a little bit more challenging to reach out to those people. And the way we receive criticism. So, in sport, we're constantly getting feedback. And how are we receiving that feedback? How's it being delivered? As coaches, as in people that are supporting our athletes, we need to really consider that. So these things can weigh very heavily. And when we talk about how they impact performance, well, if you consider, if getting up to going to coach and you have these things weighing on you, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. So our athletes getting up and going to their sport, and having these things that are feeling like a lot on their shoulders, they're not going to show up the way that we know that they can.
Yeah, I appreciate that insight there, and I think too, and obviously you hit on a little bit, but it's so important that we remember in the sport context, especially when it comes to time to perform in the games, that they're putting themselves out there in front of people, right? In front of people that they
Mhm.
care about. And like that alone, just performing in front of people is a stressor for like most people, right? Now I'm in front of people. What might they think? What if I mess up? All of those questions that run through our heads. And so obviously, in the sport
Mhm.
context, more so than many, right? Your performance is
Mhm.
on
Mhm.
display for people and open to criticism and judgment, both as coaches and then for our players as well. I
For
wanna
sure.
share a quick story with you guys that I think that you might appreciate that happened to me last week. And when you're talking about relationships and just what is going on in our players' lives, this moment popped into my mind with one of my seventh graders that I'm currently coaching. Roberto came into practice last week, and I make it I make a habit of greeting my players when they come into the gym and just saying hi to them, checking
Nice.
in about their day, asking them some sort of question, like a high five, some sort of touch, just connecting with them when they come to the gym. And
Amazing.
I asked Roberto something along the lines of, "How was your day?" or like, "Tell me something about school." I don't remember exactly what I asked him, but he said something along the lines of like, it wasn't very good. And I was surprised that he said that,
Mhm.
because I have an okay relationship with him. I wouldn't say that I have the strongest relationship with him of the kids on this team. Um, I just he's been a little bit more difficult to connect with for me than some of my other athletes, just being totally honest. And
Mhm.
so I was intrigued when he said it wasn't great. Like, I expected a normal, like, yeah, it's fine or whatever. And I said, "Hey, Roberto, get your shoes on, then come talk to me for a minute." And he does, and he comes over and I said, "What's going on? Tell me about your day." And he was kind of hesitant to tell me what was really going on. And I think that I said like something going on with like, are you having girl problems? Like, I just kind of took a shot in the dark. It's like, "Do you have a problem with a girl?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "What's going
Aw.
on? Did you break up with someone? They break up with you?" And he goes, "I think I'm about to be broken up with." And I said, "Oh, dude, that sucks." And I said, "Tell me what's going on." And it's funny, but it was a great moment. So Roberto, before
Mhm.
Christmas break, I mean, like, he had a mop on his head. His hair was so long, like I could barely see his eyes. At one point, I was like, "Roberto, you must put your hair up in a headband before you walk on this basketball court, because you can't see anything and I can't see your eyes. Like, if you want to go on the court, make sure your hair's up in a headband." So like, his hair is really long. And he comes back from Christmas break. He was actually in Mexico celebrating his sister's quinceañera, and so he comes back and he has a haircut. Like, first time, like, "Whoa, like, this is new Roberto here. Like, who is this kid with his haircut?" And I was like, "Why'd you get the haircut?" He's like, "I had to for my sister's quinceanera." And so he has
Mm.
this new haircut, and this is now like a week or so into the second semester. And now I'm talking to him about his situation with his girlfriend. He's like, "Yeah, I think she's gonna break up with me because I've kind of been avoiding her." And I was like, "Why?
Oh.
Why have you been avoiding her, Roberto?" And he's like, "Well, I don't like my haircut." And I was like,
Oh.
"Oh, like, okay." Um, and so and he's like, "Yeah, so I've been avoiding her because I don't like my haircut, and then I think she's gonna break up with me tomorrow because I've been avoiding her." I was like, "Well, Roberto, this
Fair.
this is yeah, this is a tricky situation," and proceeded to do my best to give Roberto a little bit of relationship advice for the next few minutes about
Mm.
Roberto. I was like, "Roberto, do you think that this girl liked you just because of your long hair?" And he was like,
Mm.
"No." I was like, "Why do you think she liked you?" And she was like, "Well, because I'm me." And I was like, "I think you're probably right about that. Do you think she's gonna stop liking you because your hair changed? Did that change Roberto?" And he's like, "No." I was like, "Yeah, I don't think she's gonna stop either just because you got a different haircut." And, and then I was like, Okay." I was like, "Roberto, I'm gonna give you some advice now. I'm not gonna promise you that this is gonna keep her from breaking up with you, but this is maybe your only shot right now. Okay, so I need you to listen to what you need to do tomorrow at school." Said, you need to go talk to your girlfriend, and you need to say, 'I'm sorry for avoiding you.' And then you need to tell her why you avoided her, that you were feeling
Mhm.
a little self-conscious about your haircut, and you didn't think that she would like you because you didn't like your haircut. And then you need to say that you're sorry." And I said, "I don't know if that will save your relationship, but that's your best shot." And he was kind of like hanging on to every word. I was like, "You gonna do this tomorrow?" He's like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." It's like, "Okay, like, we'll talk about it tomorrow." And now, as I'm telling you the story, I realized I forgot to follow up with him the next day
Oh,
about
no.
it, but I need to this next week and ask Roberto
Yeah.
if he had the conversation, how it went. And the last thing I was like, "Roberto, you're going to be pretty nervous before you have this conversation." He was like, "Yeah." I was like, "You need to know that that's normal to be nervous before you have this
Mm.
conversation. It'll be a little scary and you need to just do it anyway." And, and yeah, it was
Mm.
like, "All right, let's talk about it later." I need to follow up with him about it. But that was the story that was in my mind when you were talking about just relationship stressors. And obviously that one's not specific to our team, but obviously like it would have,
Mhm.
and in some ways probably already was impacting his performance in practice and games.
Mhm.
And it would have been easy for me to never ask the question, Roberto to have a really bad practice, me to get frustrated with him, and just an additional stressor of I'm worried I'm going to get broken up with, and now my coach is mad at me. All
Mm.
in this perfect storm. So yeah, that's my story. And if you have any thoughts or things that you want to share in response to it, I'd love to hear what you guys think.
Yeah. So many thoughts, so many thoughts. And I can't believe you don't have the ending to that story.
Yes, to be determined.
So, uh, so many things showed up for me is, first of all, how amazing that you're connecting with each and every one of them every day. And that's what we hope for, and that's what we want from our coaches. We're a major, major part of their lives. Um, and also I go to a place of, what have you already set up? So even doing that, you've already started that lovely relationship where he could come and say, you know what, it's not good. There's something going on. And that you were a person for him to do that. And that's what we want to see, is those teams and those situations where our players know that we're there for them, and know that if there is something showing up, if something's kind of a little off, that they can talk to us about it. And there used to be, a saying like, leave it off the court or leave it off the ice or whatever it is. And it is just not possible. Sometimes we can put it to the back of our mind for a little while. But he was going to show up, he was going to go out on the court, and that's in his mind. So, and then we're wondering why he's not doing as well as he typically can. Now we're not wondering anymore, because had the kindness to ask him.
Totally. I think for me to add to that too, it's, when we talk about mental health and coaches, and I think we see a lot of coaches kind of really wanting to, like, okay, how do we do this? But feeling overwhelmed by it, or feeling like they don't have the skills to address it. And I think that example that you shared, Luke, is a really good example of keeping it simple and not
Mm.
overcomplicating it. Asking someone how they're doing creates a culture beyond, you valuing just the athlete. It creates a culture of you feeling like, I want you to show up here. However, you as Roberto, with all the different parts of you, you get to show up here. And I think for a very long time, coaches have been kind of afraid, again, wanting to. So providing them with some really easy, simple, direct ways to do that is going to be how we really shift the conversation in sport around mental health.
Yeah, that's good. And I'll just share one other thing that um, I try to make a habit of doing. This year, I was supposed to have one team, and I ended up with two this year. So it's been harder for me just from the time constraints on me as a coach. But also, I try to have like quick, short one-on-one meetings with my players once a month, maybe more like once every 6 weeks. And I start those meetings off, and I say, "Hey, just tell me anything about life going on that's not related to basketball," and just let them
Oh.
come up with something. And yeah, some of the things that kids have told me, I'm like, whoa, like I never would have known that, or wow, that is it's really um, yeah, insightful into them as a person, right? I'm like, oh, I didn't know that you were interested in this, or wow, I
Mhm.
had no idea that you hadn't seen your parents in a year, or that you live with your aunt and uncle. It's like just, and again, like it is, it's not always convenient to do, and often, like, I sacrifice time when I could be doing stuff on court to actually sit down and have these conversations, um, and it's essential to actually building trust with them, and like you guys said, them knowing that I care about them more than just what they can do with the basketball on the court for our team,
Mhm.
and then to also, like, be able to have the quality and strength of relationship for me to be able to coach them on the court and to give them the hard feedback
Yeah.
that they need to be given at times.
Mhm.
It, I'm consistently, uh, and not always, but consistently, like, pleasantly surprised at how well some of my guys will respond to tough feedback and criticism that's very direct. Like, this is not acceptable. This is not good enough. Or you've got to get better in these ways. And maybe it's not even that I delivered it perfectly. And oftentimes reflecting back, I shouldn't have said it like that or said what I said. But there's a strong enough relationship to where they're willing to receive it. And even I'm thinking now about another guy on one of my teams this year that one of my non-negotiables for them is no profanity. And this was all the way back last summer when I first took this job and was working with them, and we were just playing in some team camp games in the summer. And like, he dropped a couple F-bombs on the court, and I took him out of the game. I was like, we don't do that here. And one of my more skilled players too. And I was like, I have no idea how this could go. He may end up hating me, and it could totally sabotage my team, or he's gonna get behind it. And now, like, almost every day, like, this kid comes up to me and greets me, even if I don't have a chance to greet him. Like, there's, when you demonstrate care consistently, you have the ability to make the withdrawal, give the hard feedback, and still have the relationship there that you need, I think, to get the most out of your athletes. So that was a little bit of me rambling. Any thoughts to any of that?
Yeah, you said something that stood out for me is you said, I sacrifice time. And I would argue that it is absolutely not a sacrifice. What you might be taking away from time on the court, but in reality, what you're going to do out there is going to be more succinct, because you're not dealing with all those little things that you've already dealt with. And so they're showing up exactly how we need them to show up. They're showing up ready. So yeah, keep doing it. Yeah, Jess?
Well, I think the performance angle too, right? Like, I think a lot of people are not talking about the performance play here when we talk about mental health. And we talk about, like Paula said, when we're building relationships, when we're doing that work, their capacity to get things quicker, their capacity to reach their potential, there's a huge performance angle here too. So, not only is showing up for people the right thing to do, but it's also a really savvy way to get the most out of your players.
Yeah, I totally agree. We think about ourselves. I mean, just for me to reflect on myself personally, like, when I am in a place where personally I'm doing well, healthy, and then in an environment where I feel safe and connected, that's when I'm going to do my best work. That's when I can perform at my best. I'm sure there's coaches listening to this who maybe they've been on a coaching staff where they didn't feel connected to the staff, and they didn't feel like maybe they were in alignment philosophically or with what was happening. And that doesn't bring the best out of you, right, as a coach, when you're trying to perform as a coach, when there's that. And so I think we can take that same and look through that lens at our team as well, right? If my athletes aren't doing well personally, and if they're not connected here, they're just not going to perform at their best. Coaches, thanks for listening to this episode. I'll be back next week with part 2 of my conversation with Jessica and Paula. You can find links to connect with them and Hone in the show details. And as always, if you enjoyed the episode and you want to grab a copy of the free podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode. Thanks for listening to the podcast.